Good afternoon. So now I will say a few words on the second part of Records in Context standard, which is the ontology, which is named RiC-O. As work is in progress for RiC-O, I won't show it, nor give an overview of it, but rather I will explain what it is, particularly for people who would not know well semantic web principles and objectives. I will also present the principle on which it is based, this specific ontology, and give some details on the roadmap we have defined. So, first of all, what is it? Briefly stated, for any conceptual model, once it is stable or finished, you need implementation tools. So, as EAC-CPF, which is an XML schema for ISA, ICA-RiC standard, we will have an ontology which will be a formal representation of records in context contextual model. And this formal representation will mainly be used for linked open data, for generating linked open data. I will explain what it means. So, since it will be a formal representation, it will be a machine processable model. And of course, it will have the same scope as RiC-CM. Both will be fully compliant. It's obvious, but I prefer saying this very, very loudly. It will be as generic as RiC-CM, I mean international standard, and will have multilingual documentation to try to go to this kind of documentation. This model will use the semantic web or linked data standards for defining entities and their relations. I won't say more about this, but the main semantic web standards we will use is Resource Description Framework, RDF, which is a W3 consortium recommendation since 1999, and Web Ontology Language, OWL, first version dated 24. These are the languages that we'll use for writing the ontology, like XML, which is used for writing a DTD or schema. Why did we decide to write and build an ontology? The main reason why archivists and archival institutions may decide to use RiC-O will probably be, among other reasons, there may be other reasons, but the main reason will be for putting archival metadata on the web, but not only in their quite classical formats, I mean Word, PDF, XML, documents, databases, but as data, more exactly sets of interconnected data. Not only this, but not closed into heterogeneous databases or systems, but stored in open repositories, so that any machine, any tool that would be able to do this can query them, retrieve what it wants to retrieve, and enrich them or reuse them. This is the main reason why an ontology is needed, because in order to do this, we have to conform to some rules, and the ontology will define the rules to conform with, to build this data. This is the principle on which the semantic web is built, and a lot of cultural heritage institutions have already done this. I mean, put linked data on the web, mainly libraries and museums, because they have an ontology. And the problem is for archival institutions, we have no generic international standard ontology. We want to build one. Now I will try to explain what I mean by RDF syntax. It's quite simple to understand. We'll take a very simple example. I'm French, so I've chosen to talk about a famous French historian, Lucien Febvre, who lived in the beginning of the 20th century. He died in 1956. He created personal papers, and his fonds is now curated by the Archives Nationales de France and a high school where he was a teacher. And the fonds code, reference code, is 591 AP, down there. And here I've written some pseudo-RDF phrases. The main thing to understand is in RDF you have to use very simple 3-component phrases to say everything you want to say. So you have here two phrases, two assertions. The first one simply says that Lucien Febvre created a font, and the second one says this font is RiC said according to RiC O. So you have, for each 3-component phrase, you have a subject, for example, Lucien Febvre, a predicate or a verb, for example, created, and an object, here the font 591 AP. Actually, the subjects and objects in these phrases will correspond to the conceptual model entities, you know. So, of course, Lucien Febvre is an agent according to conceptual model, and the font is a RiC set, which the second phrase tells us. And the verbs, the predicates, are the way RDF expresses relations. You know, Bill has presented some of the relations, and in RDF we will use the same ones using predicates, RDF predicates. Relations in RDF are called properties, but it's not important to remember this. So what we can see here is also that the created predicate has a kind of prefix, RiC O prefix. It simply means that created is a property, a relation defined by the ontology. It's like a namespace, if you know XML. It's within the vocabulary of RiC O. And this predicate type is a special predicate. It's defined by RDF itself. It just says that this resource is an instance of this class, this entity. This is a font, and it is according to RiC CM or ontology, it is a RiC set. Simply this, and no more than this. So another thing to understand is I represent here the subjects and objects are represented using their names or codes, you know. But you can also use uniform resource identifiers, and you must, in fact, use uniform resource identifiers when you use RDF. Why? Because any of these resources have to be retrieved, identified and retrieved and reused on the web. So Lucien Febvre, which is a technical representation for a person, which stands for the person, would have his URI on the web, so that any other institution can reuse it and retrieve it. This is Lucien Febvre according to the Archives nationales de France, but of course other institutions may have something to say about Lucien Febvre, and this is what I want to emphasize here. RDF technology are very, very powerful for connecting data, querying and connecting data. Back to this example, we know at the Archives nationales de France, we know a lot of things about Lucien Febvre, and we describe Lucien Febvre because he created a font where we keep. So we have created an authority record on Lucien Febvre. But Lucien Febvre also wrote a lot of books and articles that were printed and published, and that the French National Library keeps. And the French National Library has also created an authority record on Lucien Febvre. What I mean is that for archivists, for librarians, for end users, it will be very interesting if we can connect our data sets. And this is what RDF can help do. Because you have, the first triple here, the same as in the former slides. And what I have here is a triple that says that Lucien Febvre, as represented by the Archives nationales de France, in the universe, in the world of the Archives nationales de France, is actually the same entity, the same person, as the one that is represented here using a URI, because the French National Library already uses linked open data. We don't use it yet, but the idea is to say we have two resources, one generated by the French National Library, one that will be, I hope so, generated by the Archives nationales de France, and both can be linked using this OWL property, this predicate, to say it's the same, in fact. So we can link our data, and you can imagine the end user going through this, browsing this, and clicking and changing and going from an information system to another one, for example, and being able to find Lucien Febvre's fonds and Lucien Febvre's books, just clicking. This is one of the main features of RDF linked data. And the other thing to remember is this triple. Maybe it can be generated automatically by reasoning. It's another feature of RDF. You can query this data. You can imagine this is a high level of granularity data. This is small information, discrete information. We can be very accurately queried, but also you can reason on it. You can say, in using the query language that is designed for it, Sparkle language, you can say if, maybe I can imagine, if on the web you find an agent that has, for example, authorized form of name Lucien Febvre, and there is another resource that has the same authorized form of name, you can say these are the same. This is if something is exact and another thing is exact, then you can imagine another relation between resources. Same as here could be inferred. This is another feature of linked data. So, in short, RDF triples, having both a very simple structure and very fine level of granularity, allow powerful queries, going through triples, and powerful visualization too, because this is RDF form graphs, in fact. You have the objects and subjects, which are nodes, and the relations or predicates, verbs, which are arcs. So seeing archival datasets as graphs may help understanding the information they convey and make discoveries. Last but not least, this is the end of my slide, if many archival institutions use the same concept and ways of representing them in RDF, I mean, for example, use created and no another verb to say the same thing. Use record set in the former slides and not another concept in another ontology. It may help processing, of course, querying and interrelating. And that's why we are working on a model, an ontology, to help archivists doing this. Just to go a little further, this is an example of a graph. It's not dynamic. It could be, but I drew it using simple software, but you can imagine an interface where this is browsable. You can go from this to this, then this. I added, we have Lucien Febvre here in the Archives nationales de France universe. Lucien Febvre created, this is a verb, this font. This font contains a lot of series. And among these series, we have a series of lectures. Why? Because Lucien Febvre had some activity as a teacher of history teacher. He performed this activity, and from this activity resulted this series of lectures. These lectures are record sets. A record set, which is a member of this record set, and so on. This is a slightly more complex example, but very, very simple, in fact. And this is a graph, and this is using records in context relations that will be properties, predicates in the ontologies. And this is a person, which is a kind of agent. Agent is defined in the conceptual model. For the ontology, we will define also a person agent because, as Bill said, a person has specific attributes. So it will be, in the ontology, an entity, a class, and not a type of entity. This is the same as this, expressed in triples, pseudo-triples. It's not exactly the syntax, but quite quite the syntax. I will not read this now, but I will go further. So what will be the ontology? The ontology will define the classes needed corresponding to the entities of the conceptual model, such as, for example, agent, record, record set, record component, and so on, and more entities, more classes, because we need a finer level of granularity. For example, I quoted person, but we will probably define name class. You know, any agent, any entity, in fact, may have an appellation, a name, and this probably will be an ontology, a class in the ontology, etc. The ontology will define the classes. It will define the relations or object properties. In an ontology vocabulary, it's object properties corresponding to the relations we have defined in the conceptual model, such as created, has member, performed, resulted in, etc. And much more too, because if we add classes, we will need more relations, more properties. And also some data properties. I mean, what you need in the linked open data to store string information. For example, this series of letters have as local identifier, some local identifier, never mind, but I mean, this is a string. This is what we call in an ontology data property. We have to define, in fact, that this property, this relation, has a range string, kind of literal information. The ontology will define the hierarchies or multi-hierarchies of entities and properties. I will show an example in a few minutes. And the rules that govern all these classes and properties, and that you must conform to when you use, of course, this. In short, it will be a vocabulary and the grammar necessary to use the vocabulary. All this for generating linked data, linked data sets. This is another example of a graph. I won't explain it now because I have no time for doing this, but you can find it as an appendix of the conceptual model. It's about French notary in the 19th century as a person. And the question is, where are his records? His records are kept by a local archival institution here, because he worked as a notary, it was his position, in an office, a notarial office, in a small town in the department of Centre of the France. Never mind, but what I mean is, from this, if you want to study the history, the biography of Clavaud, you can browse. You can imagine browsing the graph and retrieving the records that Clavaud created and locating them in this repository, and then also discovering that there are some records on Clavaud about him, not that he created, but about him, in the National Archives of France here. So this person is the subject of this record component, which is a part of this record, which is held by Archives Nationales de France. So you can imagine an end user browsing this graph when it is it's not done. It's just a dream for the moment. This is a more complex example, but you can also imagine that you can infinitely extend it, because Clavaud has his network, a social network, and for example, is a child of another notary. Who created other records, and so on and so on. So back to the ontology. Within the ontology, we have a small team in the expert group on archival description. You can see the members' names. This is 5 people. And of course, we also work on the conceptual model and often communicate with the other members when we work on the ontology. These people have some skills, technical skills and experience, but also still have a lot of work to do, so I won't show the result. The principles, what are our principles? Objectives. We want to build something complete, which means it will be a domain ontology for people who know what means domain ontology. It means that basically The target audiences, I mean archivists, record managers, or developers who work with these persons, must be able to find any generic archival concept represented in the ontology. We most probably won't borrow any other concept from another model. We want something that an archivist can use where we can find everything, which doesn't mean that we don't make alignments. It's another part of the work, but this would be a domain ontology. More than a domain ontology, it will include a top-level abstract concepts. Why? Because it's useful for building hierarchies of classes, of properties, and also for doing mappings. I will go to mappings in the next slide. We also, of course, need something very clear and accurate. I mean, with a special care for genuine archival concepts. In fact, same objective as for conceptual model, but expressed in ontology. For example, on record sets, we will allow people using the ontology to order the record sets. You know, what you can do in a finding head, a classical finding head, say this record set is the first to be described in a file plan. You have the first one, then the second one, order sequences of record set, for example. We will also have special care for some events. I will not go further on this, but we will introduce some creation events. It will not be an event-based ontology, but it will include events and so on. And another feature which is very important for us, it reach high level of flexibility. What I mean is we want to allow people to use some parts of the ontology only. If they are interested in record or record components only, why not use the ontology, part of it, kind of modularity. We will allow to express relations, I finished in fact, very simply, but also in a more complex way. For example, for saying that some record set was created by some person, but also was created at some date, at some place, and the creation event has some certainty, has some source. We know this because we know a record that tells this, etc., etc. We want something extensible, which means that we will define properties and entities quite broadly and allow defining other sub-properties or sub-classes. You know, if you want to extend the ontology, it will be possible. Yes, just we'll also align the ontology with other models. It's very important because our domain is linked to many other ones or can be considered a part of many other ones. So I have a list here of the ontologies we will try to map with ours. I won't give any details, but I can answer questions. And we also have our method and tools. It's not very, I don't think it's important here. This is a screenshot from the tool we use, showing the hierarchy of classes, entities, if you prefer. Here you have the person class in the ontology. Again, it will not be an entity of the conceptual model. It's a class of an entity in the ontology, but not in the conceptual model. We can see that person is a subclass of agent. In the conceptual model, it's a type of agent. This is a subclass. And you have also corporate body and family, subclasses of group. Group being a subclass of agent. But a person can also be considered as a biological entity, physical, biological one. So if I had unsplitted this and displayed this, we would see person here. It's a multi-hierarchical. Yes, here. Thanks. Here you can see that person is subclass of agent, shown there, and of biological here. It's not shown, but it is actually. Our roadmap, just a word on the milestones. The first draft of the ontology will be released for comments. We need comments. By the end of this year in December. And the more complete version, version 1, will be released by the end of spring, next spring. So I thank you.